All right, welcome everybody. Again, some of you, some new faces still, which is very good to see. Welcome to the 6th edition of what is the Anthropocene Lecture Series, which is also concluding the entire series. So as you can see, we've covered quite some topics. We had very nice discussions. We were even a bit surprised that this format at the end of the day works so well. So I think this is also something that we will keep in mind for, well, future ideas in the new year. Yeah, so tonight we'll talk about the new economy. We have two guest speakers invited to this session. Yeah, I wanted to welcome you to this last edition. So it's organized by the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute together with Sjoerd Kluiving. He's the current fellow of the Anthropocene, and he's also going to introduce tonight's event. So give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Neele. Indeed. The last session, of course, is a bit sad because it's the last session, but I think also we planned very carefully. Hi, welcome. Very carefully also all these themes of the lecture series. Some of you maybe have seen other ones, but if you follow the path of different themes, you will see that we couldn't place the new economy at the beginning because we thought the new economy should be at the end. Because we can discuss all these different problems of the Anthropocene, these complex problems, these irresolvable problems, perhaps, or whatever. Yeah, but we also need to think about what order of things is, and we thought the economy is new. And that's also because, of course, this former U.S. president had this famous quote, of course, that it was the economy. Of course, it's not the economy we're referring to as now. Because some people do not refer to it, and I think it's also still discussed that also today is probably in the realm of neoliberalism. The economy was the driving force, and the sky is the limit, and let just the economy rule, and our nations will grow, and our nations will be happy. If we think about in the Anthropocene, then we can say, different things, of course, and my favorite quote is that it's still the economy stupid, in the sense that we still are driven by by the fact that we want to grow, and that we still believe also in growth, and that profit is being sustained by growth. And these are things I think we're going to discuss today. So I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to race a little bit through. My favorite economy book of the last year is by Mark Carney. Mark Carney is a senior economy professor and economist, and he's worked in many different authorities, also in global authorities around the crisis. He's a former bank president, and he says that there's objectively values tied to nature of production and the quality of labor, and of course the influence of technology, the ways work should be included in manner of value. But subjectively, the theories of value place a much greater weight on the exchange of value, and that's the price of goods and service in the market of the value. So it's always the values in the eye of the beholder, driven by preferences and to a lesser extent also scarcity. So the neoliberal economy is based on subjective value to determine what the consumer wants to pay for it. Value is an illusion, making the price the value. The price of everything is becoming the value of everything. Second, to meet the 1.5 degree target, and more than 80% of our reserves needs to stay in the ground, stranding these assets. And as Steven told me in the beginning, he was the first one who brought it to the attention, stranded assets. And also I estimate that 240 billion of stranded assets in the European automotive industry, because they have to transfer to all kinds of other automobiles and electrical vehicles, which will make this a big sort of stranded asset. But intangible factors, such as, of course, equality, social capital, well-being, that characterize a happy, healthy, and prosperous societies are not considered. So the effects of climate change will not fall equally in all channels of impact of climate change, and the poorest nations are most vulnerable to economic and social fallout. Next to that, the widespread loss of coral reefs, although they only have 1.1% of the ocean floor, they reach more than 1/4 of all marine fish species. Such a rich resource that we think of as only the coral reefs, but they have enormous impact on marine life. The coral reefs also support over 500 million people worldwide, usually in low-income countries. So, yeah, added to that, the poorest half of the world population is responsible for less emissions than the richest 1%. That's a huge inequality, which you don't often read. But this is a thing we should also consider when we talk about equalities and inequalities in the economy. So per capita, global stock of natural capital has declined nearly 40%. Physical capital has doubled, and human capital has increased by 30%. Calculations are likely to be underestimated because of different feedback loops in the economy and a host of economic channels, and no account is taken of non-market values, such as the value of species lost in our current biodiversity crisis. So we ask the question, of course, if we are okay with leaving us in an insoluble mess, and that's what that he calls himself also a boomer, and he ask himself that question. The concept of value is barely discussed. Sustainable transition is not in 2015, it's happening now. So it calls also for action. Finally, just equilibrium is now needed between steady state economic system and degrowth for the foreseeable future. So you can see from this warming greenhouse gas emission graph that most of the greenhouse gas emissions are human caused. It's the red bars at the top here. Only the natural ones are magnitudes of order smaller than the human impact. So that is also a proof of the fact. Also, numerously by IPCC reports also reported human impact. Okay, so one of my book by Thomas Williams and Salzevich in 2022 made also sort of a sort of summary of different economic systems. There's also environmental economics relies on the neoliberal system, making profit in a still ever-growing economy. Ecological economics, that's the counterpart, relies on degrowth going into circular economy. And as a control, they're suggested no straight GDP measures per country. They talk about GDP per capita. For a fair and more just comparison between countries, regions, and continents, and a just equilibrium between steady state economic system and degrowth for the foreseeable future is needed. Okay, so today we'll talk about the new economy, and I'm happy to have found Steven and Maarten to join me on this session, because I think it's we're gonna have to discuss some things. So Steven will kick off, and as the mission to say that society we live in will move forward along the pathway of the current economy, which we can question is causing or solving the polycrisis of the Anthropocene. And so we'll look at alternative economic scenarios and see whether compare these new scenarios maybe with more neoliberal capitalist system, and is that still governing our economy today? So that's my introduction. So the floor is up to you.
A quick introduction.
So with that becomes our first speaker. I'll switch so I welcome the time. So Steven is a professor here at the VU School of Business and Economics, where he is professor of international environmental economics, and then he works on international trade and investment and the local impact of mining on infrastructure in the tradable sector. And he also looked into foreign direct investment benefits for domestic firms in developing countries and the effects of resource wealth and multinational banks on foreign direct investment. It's a mouthful. Yeah, so I'm very happy to be on stage, and welcome you. And we're looking forward to say. So, go good.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. Indeed, I'm Professor of International Environmental Economics. So my first job was actually at the Dutch Central Bank. So I share sort of a bit of a career with Mike Carney, except he was governor of the Bank of England, and I was just the research department of the Dutch Central Bank. But since 2012, I'm here at the VU Amsterdam, and now I teach mostly environmental economics. For example, the course Economics of Climate Change is part of the stream master. So that course is also happening right now. So I've drawn some of the slides I use in that course as well. So if you're taking that course, it's good there. So you might already know some of the things that I'm going to say. So the title of my 20 minutes is Greening the Economy. And I'm going to have possibly my own interpretation of what a new economy is, because it's not a well-defined thing. So, I'm going to approach it from my background and my training perhaps as an economist. So let's see where that leads us today for this talk and for the discussion afterwards. But I'm open to all comments and reflections. So first, just a question, economics. Why economics? Isn't the economy just bad for the environment? The introduction talk just now seems to suggest that as well, at least to some extent. Because you can, different definitions of what economics is. So for example, a very narrow one is the way in which trade, industry, or money is organized for the study of this, which is a very money-focused definition. But I think that's way too narrow, although that's in the Cambridge Dictionary. A more broader definition that I like a lot better is that it's a science that studies human behavior. So not necessarily rational human behavior, but also irrational human behavior. As a relationship between given ends and scarce means, which have alternative uses, by Lionel Robbins, a UK economist, last century. So in that sense, it's really the study of the allocation of scarce resources. And then it becomes much more related to, say, the environment, to climate, and to the energy transition that we are going through right now. Now, the issue, however, is that nature has so far really been taken for granted by humans. As in, we have not made it scarce enough. We've pretended that nature is infinite and that the actions of humans in total, do not impact nature that much. But we kind of lived like that for millennia. Of course, it's no longer true because we are with so many, and the way we run our lives and run our economy, there's clearly an impact on the environment. So that's something that has to change, right? We cannot take nature for granted anymore. So to me, new economy is taking that into account, right? So new economy to me is greening the economy, an economy that takes much more care of nature, right? That takes nature into account, effectively making nature scarce and not something that's infinite that you can just use for whatever, however you want. Of course, the big question is then how? How do we make nature count more? So that we don't deplete nature on the way. Now, the first step might be something I'd like to call social norms. That is, perhaps we can change our behavior, right? We can change, like, let's change the way we do things, and be considerate towards nature, and not be selfish as humans. So that could be ideal, right? If we just all decide to become, better behaved in that sense. That would be fairly easy sounding, nice, sympathetic way of doing things. That will be sort of doing the right thing. Because then doing the right thing also means that you take into account the effect of your actions on everyone else, every other human, but also on nature, including plants and animals. In that sense, you take into account negative externality, as we call it, the negative effects that you have on others through your actions. By taking that into account, you might change your actions such as you reduce that impact. So examples could be that you just decide to fly less, right? Or maybe you just don't slaughter because it harms people near you. Maybe you buy things that are produced locally, so you save on the transportation cost. Maybe you cycle to work, wear a sweater instead of turn up the heater, right? Or just live smaller. So these are all examples that you might know about or even pursue yourself to have less impact on nature as a human. So now I find these things very sympathetic, but I'm also a bit pessimistic because I don't think that this is enough. That this will get us where we need to be in a short enough time period, right? So of course, there's the hope that all of this will create awareness and that will change how people consume, and also hopefully how people vote, and therefore how what type of policies are implemented by government. And so I'm sympathetic to this cause, but I don't think it goes fast enough, because it does mean that you need to change behavior, which is really, really hard. It's really difficult to change your behavior because you're used to doing things in a certain way, and changing that is not something simple. Plus, you don't need to only change yourself, but everyone needs to change. And with everyone, I mean 7 billion people on this planet, right? So it's sort of a coordination problem. How do we achieve that? How do we even reach everyone to change their behavior? So I think it's not going to be enough because global warming, the big impact we have on nature, climate change, is a global externality. Whatever we do affects everyone in the world, right? So too, and here my economist training comes to bear more. I think we should put a price on those bad things, on externalities, and that's sort of, we know how to do it on paper at least. It's not so difficult. You just tax the things that you don't want, and perhaps you subsidize the things that you do want. So you can tax and regulate activities with negative side effects. So, for example, you ban smoking in public buildings, but also you command car manufacturers to reduce the emissions year after year. Right? So they actually build engines that are more efficient. And maybe we can subsidize good things where the market doesn't provide them. Now, both of those require government to be very much aware of these negative externalities, right? To set the right levels of taxes and subsidies. So it's not that simple in practice. Plus, the political economy here matters too. How do we achieve this? Because no one likes taxes. First they reduce profits of companies, so they don't like them. But consumers also don't like them because they raise prices. It makes everything more expensive. Right? The alternative of subsidies are also not that great in the sense that, well, you get things, but in the end it costs money. So you have to somehow finance them now. You have to pay for those subsidies somehow. So either you tax more or you spend less on something else, maybe healthcare and schooling. And economics is really also about making these trade-offs now, because we can care a lot about the environment, but we have to somehow, to do it, there is a cost there. Consume less or spend less on something else. Those are tough choices to make. So part of the choice is how stringent policy be. That is, how high should those taxes be, for example, which is a reflection really of how much we care about nature, how much do we value nature. In other words, how much are we willing to give up to start treating nature as something that is scarce. Now, this is a difficult thing because nature itself doesn't have a voice. It cannot vote. So we have to somehow, decide for nature. Nature cannot tell us how much it's worth or something. There's not enough influence of nature in the democratic process. A little fun fact perhaps is that this might be changing. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly how this works, but there's a river in New Zealand called the Whanganui River. And since 2017, it's actually a legal entity. I wish I was a lawyer, because then I would know exactly what that means. But you can imagine that perhaps the river gets representation, where at the minimum, you cannot just harm the river in any way. Right? You have to be considerate towards the river. So maybe that's a model too for that might work. Second question is, of course, should we restore nature? Should we restore it to some point in the past, perhaps to pre-human conditions? But how far back? How do you decide on what point in the past you want to restore nature? So this really comes down to what is nature to us, and there might be two opposing views, sort of on the extreme ends. So one is very anthropocentric, right? So it's also the theme of this lecture series. It's really that it's just nature is here for our benefit. We're on this planet, we're humans, and we can use nature for us, right? For a human-centered view. The other is perhaps more environmentalism, where nature is special, and because we depend on it for our survival, also, the long run we do. And then you might want to conserve nature and even maybe restore it to what it was like before humans started overusing it. Now, it's an interesting idea that I draw on Paul Collier, a development economist, and he wrote a book in 2010 called The Plundered Planet, which is a good read. And he suggests that there might be sort of a middle ground that we might strive for to balance these two views. We might consider nature as an asset. And if you are environmentalist, it sounds a bit scary. But nature as an asset suggests that we should, consider it as something that we can use, but also put a lot of value on it, in the sense that you also want to use it to the extent that you, not too much, so that you also conserve it for future generations. So we suggest, well, we are on this planet and we are humans and we do have our needs. So maybe we can use the world's resources as long as we leave, as this generation, as long as we leave behind for future generations, something of equal value, right? So we don't just deplete it such that there's nothing left for future generations, but we conserve it to an extent that future generations can also reap benefits from it. So this doesn't imply conservation per se, nor restoration to some point in the past, but somewhere in between. Now the thing is, because Paul Collier is a development economist, he's also very much aware of the inequalities in the world and how nature might actually help to solve some of those inequalities. So for example, he sees it as an opportunity to reduce poverty. And we'll show you why he's coming from this. But first, some issues. Natural assets do not have natural owners, unlike man-made assets. Again, nature cannot dispose, for example, and normally there's no entity that can speak up for nature. Plus, it can be depleted. You can't fish the fish in the ocean and then become a fish. Its value is very volatile. So really, you need good governance to prevent plunder, right? To prevent something like overfishing too much. Because without good governance, without rules to restrict the use of nature, it might be plundered by some lucky and strong human people. So national borders sometimes are enough, but for the really big problems like climate change, national borders, of course, are not enough because it's a global externality. We really need to operate with all countries at once. So sustainable use is sort of the key word here. Now there I'd like to, so I'm not sure how much how I'm doing on time. So,
Just keeping time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell me that.
Yeah. So we have 5 more minutes.
Okay, so let me just link to the Sustainable Development Goals because they're relevant here, I think. But what is sustainability? Well, actually, it's quite human-centered in the sense that it's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And again, needs here is, of course, human-centric. But it does nowadays include economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. The environmental protection is something that's gaining a lot more traction recently because people care more about nature. Perhaps because of natural disasters like heavy rainfall, for example, that people are much more aware of the effects of climate change and starting to take that into account. The social inclusion part, of course, means that everyone counts, not just rich countries, but also poor countries, and the poor within rich countries, for example, but also economic growth. So, before we throw out economic growth, I'd like to show you a few pictures of how important economic growth really is. Because it does help to solve some very old and tough problems like inequality and poverty. So, for example, the benefits of economic growth. So the typical measure is GDP per capita, which has its, you can debate whether that's a good measure or not. And here you see between year 1 and year 2018, what happened to GDP per capita. And you can see that the Industrial Revolution has really tremendously increased income for humans, right? Of course, that has also led to the problems that we're talking about here today. But also some benefits. So, for example, this is the distribution of income in 1975 by colors are sort of continents. And there's also a little vertical line there, the international poverty line. But back in 1975, there were still many people living in absolute poverty. A lot in China, for example, India. Now in 2015, after a lot of economic growth, a lot of the distribution shifted to the right, the poverty line. Right? So one benefit of economic growth really is less poverty, right? Which is a good thing, I'd say. So before we do away with economic growth, it does lead to less poverty. So this is the share of the population living in extreme poverty from 1820, so this longer time period. You can see it declining quite steeply. But also other things that we care about, no? So GDP is a measure of income, but it does correlate with things that we care about, like better life expectancy. So children don't die as often anymore before the age of 5. Better education. So there's literacy. By now, the illiteracy rate in the world is only about 10%. It used to be much, much more. Of course, inequalities remain. So this is education, distribution of education in ventiles. So red is not much education, blue is a lot of education. So clearly there's a lot of inequality that still needs to be addressed. But it might be harder without economic growth. Of course, the downside is too, one of the impacts we have on nature is the CO2 emissions, which is the black line here. But all this growth has also come with emissions, partly due to population growth, income growth, luckily, there's also some good news that the carbon intensity and the energy intensity of our economy has been declining over time, ever since 1965 already. But of course, the decline is not steep enough to limit CO2 emissions to no emissions, right? That's where we need to go to. So we need to make those purple and green lines go down much more fast than they are now. So the challenges that we, so back to I think 2 more slides. So the challenges we have then, I think, is that we need to, I think we need to keep economic growth, but we need to change it around such that we don't harm nature so much anymore. Right? How to value nature and take it into our decisions. Now, politicians will tell you, well, they need to be re-elected. So they're not automatically big proponents of climate action normally because they fear that too stringent environmental policy will cost jobs, right? And therefore votes. That's a typical argument you'd hear from the average politician, let's say. But if we tax companies too much, they'll just move their companies abroad. Right? If one country does it by themselves, that's called carbon leakage. Because every firm can move their production to another country, produce in a dirty way, still emit CO2 emissions, and then they're not emitting it here in the Netherlands, but they are emitting it somewhere else, and then that doesn't help global climate, right? So that's an issue that needs to be solved, either by cooperation across countries, but there are also some interesting ideas out there. For example, the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU has started to implement, where we can tax at the border goods that are produced in other countries in a very dirty way. We tax the carbon content of those goods rather than the value. And that might level the playing field a bit more. Another challenge is the speed of change, right? Because we'd like to do this quick, because we still have a window of opportunity to limit global warming. But a very quick changeover is also difficult to achieve. Politically, it's difficult. There's also this risk of energy poverty. Not everyone can afford to become green overnight. Like you've seen it in the energy crisis of last winter, where many people were not really able to afford their heating anymore. And if you do this very quickly, you lose growth, but also all those benefits that I showed you. Now, further, since there are still a lot of there are still poor countries in the world, of course, and they also want to grow. So, are we going to deny them growth by being very stringent on the environmental policy? And so, for example, if you buy locally, it's good in the sense that there's less emissions involved in transporting goods, but you also kind of deny a source of income that a farmer in another country might have when trying to sell you something. Slide. How to get off the policy implemented? I put it off here, but first you have to work with other countries. We cannot do it as a country by ourselves because we live on this planet, so we have to cooperate with other countries. Both democracies and autocracies, right? Also, Russia, India, China, they all need to cooperate with each other to reduce emissions. I think we should tax carbon in one way or another, but also redistribute, because a tax also generates revenue, and we can use that revenue to take the sharp edges of this policy. For example, by redistributing to the poor, such that they are not affected too much by our environmental policies, including perhaps sending transfers to developing countries to help them transition to the new economy. How to get it implemented? Well, I think it's good that in this country, for example, have a rule that limits the amount that you can donate to a politician. I think it's 100,000 euros. Because if you wouldn't have that, you could have special interest voting, where people that are very rich or big companies could just support particular politicians more than would be good for nature. Second, we can use the revenue from carbon taxes to stimulate, for example, green technological advancements. So that's also economic growth, technological advancement, but let's steer it in a direction that actually helps us to become greener quicker. Well, I think would be a good destination for carbon tax revenue. Now, finally, you also, there's a lot of doing good in the sense of companies are also more aware of climate change and of nature, and they're also trying to change over their organizations by being more considerate, really, towards nature, I suppose. For example, CSR and ESG are terms that you see more and more often. And that's probably good, but I don't think it's sufficient. It's sort of similar to individuals changing their behavior, companies changing their behavior that way is probably also not sufficient. I think it's probably easier to lead an organization towards a more greener economy by focusing on spreadsheets, which which means things you can measure, and therefore I think taxes. So I think that's a much more a quicker way to change to change companies' direction of doing business than relying on CSR and ESG. Okay, I think I'm out of time, so I'll stop here and look forward to your questions.
Time for some immediate questions, but also for more discussion later on. So if there's anything you need clarification on, this is your chance. Yes.
I think I agree with the prospect of redistribution somehow, but I think we're in the minority of agreeing in terms of redistribution, particularly when you look at powerful economies in the West, who are very much free market, anti-tax, capitalistic, let's say. How do we make this, well, I don't know, how do we make this a majority? How do we make this a favorable policy for the masses to vote to in the end? Because I still feel like, whilst ESG and CSR is being thrown around a lot, I still feel like I'm a minority in where I am in terms of my agreement with you. I don't think the majority of people agree with you, with me. How do we change that? Does that come from education, awareness, or is that just going to take a long time, / too long?
Yeah, no, good question. So this is also, I guess your question is also about how to get it done. So I think awareness helps. So for example, there was a big demonstration in Amsterdam this Sunday, for example. They said it was twice as big as the year before. It's twice as big again next year. If that gains traction, then hopefully enough people vote in favor of green policy. Yeah, so that helps. But there is a bottom line for many people, and that they are possibly afraid for their work, their jobs, but also afraid of inflation. There's a lot of the environmental policy first effect might be higher prices because you'll pay more for meat, for driving, for flying. Right?
And the lack of reskilling as well. Like I know in the UK, a lot of the environmental policies have actually turned back and they've gone away from their targets due to concerns about the social inequalities that will arise and people not being able to afford fuel and things. And I don't know how this, I guess that's the redistributions that you're talking about in terms of.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily want people to consume less per se, but we want them to change what they consume. So take the train instead of fly, for example. Not necessarily stay home all year. So it's really changing that what they consume. And you can achieve this by taxing carbon, so that they don't consume whatever emits the most carbon and is the worst for climate change. But by redistributing, I mean you could give them income support, the lower end of the distribution. Not everyone needs that, lower end, such that the total value of what they can consume doesn't necessarily go down. It consumes sort of the same amount but different things.
We sparked the discussion, I think. Yeah, shall we do 2 quick questions or is it more extensive?
My question links to
Yeah.
that. So you mentioned those different things that need to happen on different levels. So the social norms are really focused on action that the consumer needs to take, whereas taxes or like a redistribution of wealth via laws and regulations is on the government. And then you mentioned the ESG, which is really targeting the organizations in the middle. And I guess we can agree that we need to have action on all those levels. But what do you think, what is the most effective, or which of those like 3 levels, institutional levels, is the most urgent to take action in order to drive real change?
Yeah, so I think there should be serious government policy that puts a price on everything that's bad for the environment and stimulates things that are better for the environment. But how to make governments do those things in a democracy works through voting. So yes, then we need to have, say, a movement or something that convinces more people to vote in favor of that type of policy. So yeah, vote green. But how do you get more people to vote green? Well, maybe you have to ask a political scientist to how that's done. But yeah, their awareness is important as well.
Okay, more questions later, or is it for now?
It's a short question. You advocated for sustained economic growth. So I'm wondering if you are convinced that that is possible with the finite resources we have on our planet.
Yeah, good question. To me, it boils down to whether you are an optimist or a pessimist when it comes to technology. If you are, a very big optimist in terms of technology, then maybe nuclear fusion will become commercially available soon, which has no nuclear waste and still gives us energy for free. Right? That would solve a lot of this. If you're a pessimist, then maybe that's never achievable, or maybe there's not enough land available for enough solar panels and everything, and really the only way out is to just consume less, right? Yeah, it's difficult to forecast the future, but I do think that stimulating technological advancements in the green part of where technology is going will help to sort of bring forward that optimism view, right? To speed up whatever we can to get to reduce emissions.
Yeah, okay, I see here's
Stop now.
getting into maybe if you want to, I mean, we have Maarten now also telling us something, but we also have a lecture on degrowth, and there was this one now, just before this at 4 actually. There will be another one on Friday at 1:30 as well, also here at VU. So there's also lots of opportunities to discuss that part as well. But I think for now we'll stop here and we'll have Maarten on stage. You're the so let's take a conversation. Yes, and then Maarten is of the what is the one? Our new economy network. It's a good abbreviation, though, where you're the outreach officer.
Yep.
So that's why you're here, I guess, reaching out to us. That's very nice. We're very much looking forward to what you have to tell and then to discuss. I think there's lots of issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I was curious because we had no time to exchange information about the presentations. Probably we have the same presentation twice, but luckily I have some different slides for you. Maybe a little bit about my background. Our new economy is a foundation in the Netherlands, and we try to change the thinking about the economy and economics in a more sustainable and fair economics kind of way. And especially, I think it's nice to have talked about the Anthropocene because there's a lot of interaction going on there. For this lecture, I'd like to start with what is an economy, because I don't know if there are any of you studying economics or no economics here. Yeah. Okay. So that might be a bit of double information there. What I'd like to do next is dive into the economic theories from the past to present, because if you talk about a new economy, then we should at least know what was there in history. And then I try to zoom out and see what it's all about, because we are in a polycrisis. And therefore we become, we come in uncharted territories. And well, that's because our main topic from our new economy is economics and education. I'd like to have a few words about the implications on economics education. So let's start with what is an economy? And an economy, I'd like to compare it with a forest landscape. And a forest landscape is not fully human built, nor is it fully independent. And we can co-shape this system, but unlike a product or a building, it also leads a life on its own. It grows, flourishes, or it's getting bad. And we can use maps to navigate and describe the landscape. And we can use different kinds of maps. For instance, an altitude map, a road map, or a map which kind of soil is in there. And if you prefer a more dull definition. I have one here. This is the one we use on the website Economy Studies. And we say economies are open systems of resource extraction, production, distribution, consumption, and waste disposal through which societies provision themselves to sustain life and enhance its quality. Note there's nothing in there about scarcity. And note that we explicitly address resource extraction and waste disposal. Familiar with the plants and habits of animals, he can keep the plants in good condition. But how and if the plants grow, when autumn leaves fall, when it rains, he understands it most of the time. If he doesn't control it, that's up to nature. And of course, the question is which map to use. For the economists, we have micro and macroeconomics in there. But unlike a forester, the ideas of the economists and the political philosophers have much more impact. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else, according to John Maynard Keynes. So, economists have a crucial role in our society. They're policymakers, the ministry, CFOs, consultants in business, in research and education, and also journalists, talk shows, and I have some of the famous economists from the Netherlands in here. And I think we can conclude that we need to find out how we get to this point in time. So let's have a brief look in history of economics. I'm not sure whether it started here, but there are some points. I'm just going to cherry pick in history. There are thick books you can study if you like. So the origin of the word economy is from the Greek philosopher Aristotle. And he talked about economia as household economics, and also defined grammatistic, making profit by trade, which he finds something very different in those days already than economics. If you look at the history of economics, we most of the time focus on Western economics, mainly within Europe, but there's also a lot of things going on outside of the European context. So why not include that in our historic travel? We already had the philosopher Khaldun. He was thinking about economics, sociology, demographic studies in 1332. We had the Ming dynasty already using, they invented paper money and privatization of goods. Take a step further in history, we see mercantilism. They defined a fixed amount of resources, and what one party wins, the other one loses. For the Dutch people, this is the VOC time. So we discovered the world and took what was available. And mainstream economics today to forcefully make the point that the world is not zero-sum. There are other ideas about it. But still in politics, some people think this kind of way. Another moment in time, later on, we had physiocratism in France. It's a kind of experiment, but they tried out a laissez-faire economy. Laissez-faire comes from this period and is famous now. You step back, you don't interfere. They did that before. They tried this experiment and it failed really hard, even to the point where people were living in starvation because merchants exported grain in order to obtain the best profit. And the outcome was not exactly happiness for all ever after. And we have classical economics, and it's the starting point of the classical theory of production and distribution in a free market. But please note that this free market, as Adam Smith was describing it, was small business. It was artisans and entrepreneurs in a local village and not the big multinational we see today. And also note that at the same time in history, there were people that were thriving, another continent, who did not use money at all. Even, well, they were not very happy about. Very interesting book by Graeber and Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything. If you get a hand on it, please read it. And I could tell on and on about all the older schools in history of economic thinking, being Karl Marx with the Marxian economics, ecological economics, or the more recent feminist economics, who had light another, shed another light on economic thinking. Point is that what we know about economics depends on the glasses or the map we use. And the dominant economic perspective determines how politics and business will act. And to give you an idea about that, what this means, I have a short video. Available, you might miss and you might not see that you have a certain point of view and that the reality is massively distorted, although it looks normal to you. More schematic, we have this picture that you have the economy and you have all these different perspectives or theories or frameworks. They have overlaps, they're missing types of information. And all this way of thinking we learn at school. And I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Samuelson. He's author of one of the most famous economics education books. But he tells us that I don't care who writes a nation's law or crafts its advanced treaties, as I can write its economic textbook. So that's interesting. There's a lot of the things we know today, what we learn in school. And there is a hidden curriculum. If we know that the cause of low wage for a woman or a particular racialized identity is a low productivity, rather than a lack of bargaining power, this shapes the solution we develop. The way we think of a problem and the way we look at problems shapes how we can solve problems. And there's a certain focus in our curriculum. Students mainly learn to see the environment as an externality. It's just a word, but the living world is the foundation of all economic activities and should be placed at the center of the economic analysis. And it's possible because economic theories and their ontology, there's a lot going on here. We have different views and different ideas about what should be central kind of problem we should study, being a scarcity, uncertainty, dominance, or change. Which you prefer? We have different starting points from where we start our investigation of the economy. Start from an individual, a micro viewpoint, start from groups and institutions, or do we take a system view? Where do we start our analysis? And we have mainstream economics. There's a definition here. Mainstream economics actually is what we see most of the time. And within mainstream economics, if we look at education, we see that, especially in bachelor, neoclassical theory dominates our education. Three axioms are still vivid and alive today. And it's a strong emphasis on mathematical formalization, methodological individualism, and methodological equilibrialism. And if you say that's not true, well, we did a study. And we found in the bachelors in the Netherlands that 86% of the theory is neoclassical, based on neoclassical information theory. We see that there's a lot of quantitative analysis in mathematics, and we see that the real world is not very much available in the economic textbooks and in the classes at that moment. It's 2017, and currently we're working on a new survey, 2023, and we see that improvements have been made, luckily, but still there is not a real breakthrough. And what we miss or underemphasize is the rest. It's power, it's the environment, it's energy, it's culture. It's not in the picture. And the problem is we are in the middle of a polycrisis. The polycrisis, I have a definition taken from Lawrence and Homer Dixon. And I highlighted the sentence, significantly degrade humanity's prospect. And we go back to our definition. Sustain life and enhance its quality. So actually our economy is, well, how do I say it? Our provisioning system is under attack by the polycrisis. So we are in the middle of a paradigm shift. In the 1930s, 1940s, we go from laissez-faire to Keynesianism. In the 1970s, from Keynesianism to neoliberalism. And now we go beyond growth. This is not my opinion, it's the OECD 2020. And it's good to know that a different way of thinking is not the same as designing an economy. This is not about designing economies. This is even more in ideology or in that sense. But what we see now is emerging all these kind of new frameworks and tools in economic thinking, donut economy, common goods economy, broad welfare in the Netherlands, well-being economy alliance, mission economics. And the question is, how do all these economics and frameworks and theories are related to each other? It's beyond growth. So the old framework was GDP-driven profit. The goal was growth, and if you don't have growth, there is stagnation. You can have regrowth, or you can have a recession. The way out is governments can help to improve by tax subsidies, regulation. Consumers can create a better future by spending their money differently, and entrepreneurs seek an optimal position in this playing field. $1, one vote. What's new? Other value. So if your value is well-being and your growth becomes progress and stagnation becomes balance, then all these new frameworks fit in there. Even the SDGs. What do they all have in common? They all GDP indicators. You can use more of them together. So pluralism, use explicit. How can this work? Well, have different classes for the same problem. See how they help us. And let me emphasize that I don't want to put away new possibilities. There are good solutions there. Higher price on externalities, harmful activities will become too expensive. Surprise. But there are also other ways to look at the problem. So, for instance, the well-being economies use indicators other than GDP that reflect well-being on a living planet. Of course, you need a government to ensure this indicator is contained. Well, if you want to know how this is implemented in education, we're not there yet. It's a journey that started, and we have the week of economics education next week, 20 to 24th of November. Yes, there's an urgent need to incorporate new economic approaches in our education system, and this is a platform to discuss, to exchange information, to debate. A lot of it is in Dutch, but we have English workshops available. So you're invited. Any questions?
Yes, exactly. Time for questions. First only for Maarten, then we can turn to a wider discussion.
Is it thank you for your is it a widely felt idea that the need to incorporate new economics into education, modern day education? Is this a widely felt idea among your colleagues in the Netherlands?
Yes, in the Netherlands, we see that it depends on the layer of education you're talking about. So in high schools, yes, it's felt urgently, but it's difficult because we have this curriculum and it's changed once every 7-8 years.
It's hard to change.
Yes, in applied sciences, they're already working with a lot of circular economy, all these kinds of ideas that fit within new economic thinking. In academics, there's a difference between what's happening in research. There's a lot of things going on in research, but not all of this is already implemented in bachelor's and education.
Is it part of your chair? Is it part of your chair to research education in the Netherlands?
No, we're a think tank, so okay, we bring this kind of presentations and lesson materials. And, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for slightly different perspective. But the question would be, you suggested there are some ways to include qualitative measures in the new economy. That's what I'm seeing is the biggest barrier to actually doing it, to the new economy. So how can we include qualitative measures? And how can we weigh them up against quantitative monetarization?
Yeah, I think that's the most difficult one. If you look at there was the book of Rutger Hoekstra, all these indicators he's describing, most of them are still quantitative measures. I think, yeah, it will be hard because it's in terms of discussions among sciences, maybe social sciences, other sciences as well. I think for economists, I'm not sure.
Even biodiversity is very difficult to quantify in a way that makes it
yeah. Yeah, I don't have a very good solution there, no.
Possible, no, otherwise, I mean, I think you can join also on stage and we open the discussion.
Lenses to be applied, or which kind of viewpoint on economics? Does your thinking also deal with which one would be preferential to apply to kind of guide us towards sustainable development, or which new economic system
missed the first sentence, but I still come out.
Oh, yeah, you presented a variety of different lenses to your class. There's beyond curves, there's German economics, there's circular economy. Which one of these would you personally prefer to be the new mainstream one, or is your thinking also working on figuring out which one would be ideal for us to apply in our situation?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So, are we going from a dominant economic mainstream thinking to another dominant economic mainstream thinking? I think hopefully not, because in pluralism you have the right tool for the job, and if you choose a new dominant way of thinking, you might end up with insufficient answers. So I don't have a favorite one, so that's.
Hi. Can I take it? Sorry. First of all, thank you both, obviously, for your presentation. But I was wondering, I actually wanted to ask you, because your presentation stayed, I think, not an economist, but your presentation stayed a bit more close to this mainstream economics that you were talking about. So I was wondering what your views on everything that you've been saying are. I don't mean to start a fight or anything, but I'm just curious.
That's a fair question because I'm with the SBE faculty, the economics faculty, so I teach economics. Now it was interesting what you said though, that you made a distinction between let's say we'll start in high school at the bachelor level and then perhaps at the master level. Because myself, I've also gone through all those phases of training, except not really high school. I started in economics a bit later. But I also have to confess that I started to like economics more from year 3 onwards. So to me, it has a flavor it has to me is that you kind of have to work your way through the basics. And some of the basics are, methods, how to write a mathematical model and then solve it. And quite often those, I call them basics, not per se simple or something, but they're basic in the sense of they leave out lots of the things that we really also want to include, right? But to include all of those things makes them very difficult and intractable. So you make, simplifying assumptions. But I think what's wrong is that perhaps if you only see that type of education, you might take that all too serious, right? That it becomes a normative thing or something. It really is just a simplified way to try to structure the reality, the real world, which is much more complicated than those models capture. Right? But you have to start somewhere and build on that to make it more complicated and more realistic. But that sort of comes later in your educational career. So
it appears to be an exact science.
Well, we're trying to make it more and more exact, yeah, but it also is more and more complicated because we're dealing with humans. It's like trying to hit a moving target, sort of. We can't put everyone in the lab and have everything nicely behaved. But I'm not sure what the solution is because, of course, if you only have high school education, there's only so much time. There's only so much you can include. So, but I think one important message should be that just don't take all those models as normative as something too serious, but it's more like a parable. And talk about other things that are also relevant, but are just not in the model right now.
I agree.
So I would like to add other points from the business perspective because I'm a researcher in family businesses, and I recently published a research about a case study of a family business. We wanted to understand why we invested so much in the SDGs. So I want to connect to both your presentations, like the role of education and how do we change people's behavior. So the answer to our question, why we invest so much in the SDGs, was based on the values of the current generation. And these values that were like sustainability, helping the community, etc., were coming from the previous generations that lived in the war. So these previous generations, like parents, grandparents, taught the current one the value of like things, of respecting other individuals, of respecting the environments. And this is what the current generation brings to the business, producing a change in the. So I wanted to add to the discussion on the role of education to produce a change, and to the first intervention about how do we change it. It's
Can I
not a
start?
question, it's just something to add.
Yeah, so no, it's a good point because if the direction I'm thinking of is that in a family business, it's the family who controls what the firm does, right? They have full control of what the firm does, and therefore they can apply whatever vision or ideology they have or values they have to the actions of the firm. So that's sort of almost straightforward in the sense that if you change the values of the owners, then they also change the behavior of the firm. They can, right? They can choose to do so. Perhaps they forego some profits in the area of better outcomes that relate to the SDGs, but they can do it. It's of course a bit harder with a larger firm that's owned by many people, right? Which is publicly traded, for example, in which almost all of us have shares through pension funds, for example. Right? Then it's much harder to do these things because then it depends on the views of all the shareholders, and those are very different usually because there are many. Now you do see that pension funds are starting to change a bit. For example, ABP. So I mean, APG is the people who do all the investing, but ABP is the civil servant pension fund that also I am with, and they have already pledged to sort of invest less in coal, for example, and weapons. So it can change because they're a big investor, but it's a much slower process than when you're a family-owned firm.
Yeah, I think what I might like to add there is that even for the bigger firms and even for shareholders, at the same time, they are citizens and concerned people. So it's not necessarily that all businesses with shareholders are evil and family businesses are good. It depends also on all the other things we know and we learned at school. So I think that's mainly why we do a lot with education, because if you change the way you think about what's important in the economy, then you might also consider other options more valid.
Yeah, Camille first and then
Thanks for some very interesting presentations. I have a question for the second speaker. I'm curious about this plural economy that what's wrong that right now if different models or theories sort of align with different sectors, different scales, or institutions, or how that emergence takes place, and if this the growth and how what your vision or imagining there.
Yeah. No, but maybe take a practical approach. So that if we go back to education, if we bring material into the classroom, we can currently we bring a lot of theory and we explain how it works. Why not bring a problem in the classroom and then ask or bring the analysis of the problem in the classroom and also bring the debate. So what is one or the other economist thinking about it? What are possible solutions to such a problem? And then learn critical thinking. And from there you can start to develop. So it's not like, okay, we introduce pluralism and problem is solved, but we need to change our attitude towards different kinds of theories. We need to choose, we need to learn, we need to see what's adaptable to a specific problem. So it's more like a process than change over one night.
It's about didactics, I think. This is called challenge-based learning or problem-based learning, which you can also find in different disciplines.
On a larger scale, would that mean that problems would need to be solved within communities? What about transnational or global problems or conflicts between sectors?
Yeah, but I want to make a distinction between economics and politics.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want a solution for political problems, I think that's slightly different discussion.
Yeah. No, thank you very much.
But simplistically thinking of economics, you have microeconomics about the organization, macro about policy, institutions, institutions, and it's something that's kind of missing investors. Capital sort of there is I do feel like investment is really missing. Actually, it's something that has corporations do, not individuals do. And negative things happening because of financial shell areas because of shareholders really big financials get a really bad reputation. But I think a lot of the bad things actually comes from they are held accountable too. So do you think this is an omission in economics and which theory addresses this and maybe is basically the externalities of the shareholders, but I don't know. So shareholders accountable to something. There's always someone who's paying for someone else.
Investment is central to economics. We do talk about the investment a lot. Just, for example, just think of well, no, not economists, students. It's got to think of a growth model. But, the way we think about investment, for example, is that there's a capital stock out there, it's building factories, for example, and they depreciate over time. And so they wear and tear. Your car, you have to replace it at some point because it wears out. If your bicycle. So you save, so you use them to generate income, and then you save part of it, and that's those savings you can invest again.
But that's the individual, not the
That's what companies do too.
investor.
But that's what companies do too. But then the question is, of course, what do you invest in? Right? And there we tend to leave it to the free market to decide what is the best investment, as in what gives you the best return. But yeah, what is the best return also depends, of course, on government policies. So to bring back what I was talking about, those taxes and subsidies do influence what is a good investment and what is not.
And again, the neoliberal approach, right? And if we would
Yeah.
get onto the pluralism, and we could jump in right at the source by educating the shareholders of the future on maybe, yeah, we need to talk about the negative externalities that my investments create, then maybe that could prevent such a like a shareholder dominance that then leaves a giant like Shell to divest from renewable energy projects.
But that's like saying you should not invest in coal energy, which is fine. If everyone follows that sort of description, then it's okay. Right? But I'm, I guess, a little bit more cynical, because I think there will be people who will invest in coal energy anyway, even if you tell them not to. So that's where government policy can come in, and we have to kind of make sure that investing in coal is not interesting anymore, that it's a losing bet, right? Always.
Not been taught problem solving, and I mean, I don't think they were just in a lecture also believing everything that was being told. What I know of universities. So how do we avoid what happened to the current leaders from happening to those today? I'm sure they weren't just mindlessly taking what the lecturer told them. I don't know what's different to problem solving.
I'm not sure what the question is, but
I mean, so we need to make critical thinking, to make problem solving, different perspectives, but I'm sure also people a few decades ago were that's a vacuum thinking.
well, I don't know what's your opinion about what's happening
in class at this moment, but
I think if you read textbooks and education, but it's especially in high schools and first years of your study, that is more like presenting what growth looks like.
then you're discovering what are the debates and learn you to think critically. So, and I think you're right. When you're ready with your master or doing your PhD, then there's a whole world to discover.
Yeah, I very much like both of your talks and also like the discussion so far, but I want to shift a little bit to responsibility. I think it's maybe a heavy theme, but it's also important to discuss in an economic context because we've seen different economic perspectives. Steven has shown the environmental economics. You showed some bunch of economic models also, which are even including neoliberal economy. So we can use actually from everything. It's not cherry picking, but it's maybe using intelligently what we can use from all models to become sustainable. There's one big problem we have with the stranded assets. We talked about the stranded assets of the fossil fuel industry. They cannot explore much further if you want to contain the global warming to like acceptable levels. So one solution, which has been suggested out of responsibility, is to stabilize the rich economies and let the poorer countries grow. Yeah. Because they can grow on fossil fuel, they still have to keep up a little bit. But that would be a fair sort of distribution. But that would mean, of course, that we have to refrain from growth in the.
Yes, well, it depends on how they grow, no? Because many people live in, say, India and China. If they all buy cars and those cars are not electric, then that will increase emissions to very high levels. Right? So yes, growth, but preferably of a growth type that emits less CO2.
Western world.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is inequality, no? Because we are very wealthy and perhaps less wealthy than we per se need to be. So that's why I'm really also in favor of those perhaps transfers to help the developing world to catch up, but also to catch up in such a way that it emits less CO2. But yeah, it's also difficult to sort of choke the Western economies or the rich economies too much, because that's also where a lot of technological progress comes from. A lot of the new innovations come from these more educated and richer economies, and we can spread them quicker to the rest of the economy to become greener quicker. But yeah, it's difficult to say, what level is enough development for humans, because even in rich countries, there are also poor people, right? There's also inequality within there. And people, if you ask people what they care about for the next election year, for example, healthcare would be one of them, for example. So despite the fact that we are very wealthy, if you compare us to the rest of the world, still people worry about healthcare, for example.
It's also about politics too.
Yeah, but there is research, psychological economics research on what makes people happy. It's a difficult one, the way humans work, because we become more happy if we are a bit better off than yesterday, and if we're a bit better off than our neighbors. And both are difficult to combine at once, and both are also difficult to achieve while at the same time, caring more for nature. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe don't shoot the messenger, but we are already in a kind of collapse, especially in the biodiversity sphere. So is it a good idea to still talk about growth, and do we have the space to grow and run into more collapse? Or should we reshift and talk about missions, talk about balance, and regenerate?
Do we need growth for technology advance? That's what Steven says.
If there's any technology that helps us, I would embrace it. But to think that technology can solve the issue and save us from a collapse, I think it's mixed. So there is regenerative technology we need. There is, maybe if a thorium kind of solution is available within a certain amount of time, we have some energy from that. It could save us, but I don't think that will be enough.
Okay, last round of questions. So there's 1, 2, 3. Oh wow. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Okay, so you start.
I was just trying to perspect the question, but
earlier, and I think that's interesting. And I was reading this the other week about the realist, about like how if you look at it from a consumer perspective, like how like I'm kind of curious how we can implement that realist kind of way of living, of just using this stuff as here, because like you say also with the economy that there's a lot of waste that's part of what the economy is. So maybe like use the waste, or like I'm not sure if you get where I'm going with this, but do you kind of see something in this, or like living as a realist
Circular
on
economy.
consumer level, just not trying to be too happy or too sad with the current situation, or believing in technology, or just say that we're all doomed, but like say it in the middle. And then like do you see some kind of structure in that in the consumer level? Like I'm all kind of looking for the question here, but
Yeah, well, for an example, it would be great if everything you buy can be repaired. Right? But now there are products that you cannot really repair because they're completely glued together. I think your cell phone is probably one of them. Right? But then they're impossible to repair or replace components, so you have to throw away the whole thing.
Except the fair phone.
All right, except the fair phone, yeah. So, to require companies to make their goods in such a way that they can be recycled, that at least the separate components can be taken apart again and therefore reused, that would be a step forward, right? So you don't have, doesn't all end up in landfill, because that's simply a waste.
Yep. And you can support it with the tax shift from products to labor. But,
I have a question about achieving balance in the economy. Yeah, I don't know who wants to answer the things that's for you. Like for instance, in the Dutch economy, there are already cities embracing the idea of the Dutch economy. But now our economic system is based on incentives, it's bringing more money. So yeah, like how can we achieve that balance within the system in the economy?
how can we
Achieve
achieve
balance.
a balance within the system?
No, economy, yes.
I think, for instance, donut economics has a lot of tools to achieve balance, to be regenerative, to not use more than what you can use to stay within the boundaries. But I don't know what you're looking for, practical solutions, or
The thing that I'm struggling with is that now in economy, it's based on getting more assets or seeing a growth in your revenue streams. And if you're going to a balance, how can that work with the system we have right now? Does it mean that everything we make needs to circulate? Is that enough?
Yeah. I think it depends what you call progress. So currently we need to buy more and sell more, produce more, and then we call it progress. If you have, for instance, if you read the book of Marianne Mazzucato, Missions Economy, you can define progress in many different ways. And if you have a different indicator, so not being money, but being a certain kind of wellness you have in a nation, and you can measure that properly, then that will be the thing you're heading for. That will be your mission. Not necessarily making more stuff or buying more stuff. So it's thinking differently. So for instance, the short movie that I showed, take a different perspective and see how massively distorted the room is. And then you act differently.
But that sounds more like a policy level, something how a politician would look at a country. But what would be the incentive then for someone who actually makes something or someone who provides a service?
I'm not sure if it depends what you need. I think if you look to the global south, the incentives and what is needed is different than here in our Dutch society. So I think the rules of the game will be different.
There's another question. There. Otherwise, you. Oh yeah.
Yeah. You also had a question, right?
Yeah, we have two.
Go for it. Okay. I have a question for Professor Poelhekke. So, if we assume more growth would be good for the world, and for most products we need to get materials from mines and get them into products from consumer businesses, but we also have depreciation. We have that products become useless after some time. There is the model of circular economy where waste becomes input for new products, but in many cases the old building is not as useful anymore and therefore cannot really be recycled. What's your view on waste in this whole picture and things becoming really recyclable and therefore growth getting more and more waste that you mentioned in landfills which cannot be used anymore?
Yeah, it would be great if recycling can be used more. I'm not an engineer, but I do think that quite a few processes of recycling that we have now are actually quite energy intensive. First of all, you have to separate all those materials, then you have to like remelt it, or even with tearing down a building, you have to just grind all the stone back to its dust or something. You can make new cement. Also, creating cement is very. So there's some limitations there. It's not necessarily better for the world to recycle than to mine for new materials for the world. Of course, mining itself has a local impact as well. It's devastating to the local nature or even to local humans because it can be very polluting, can be a big health impact. So it's not always a clear trade-off. What is better? It depends a bit on technology. Of course, we can make sure that some parts of the world are completely off limits to mining, like Antarctica or Greenland or something, or big parts of nature. And the more we do that, the more we also make recycling more attractive, because all those materials that we've mined, they haven't left the earth; they're still there, but now they're not found in a concentration in a mine, but they're sort of spread out in a landfill. You can retrieve them again, I suppose, given the right technologies, but it is going to be very costly, sometimes even more emission intensive than mining for new things. Yeah. That answers your question.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
The last one?
Me. So you both talked about VU more extensively than you did, but you both talked about carbon taxes, and that's obviously something that is mentioned, like talked about a lot, and also for a long time already, but we've not seen it implemented ever before. And I'm wondering if, it's probably also to do with electoral dynamics. It's not a very popular thing to propose, maybe because you want to be re-elected as a politician. But I've also understood sometimes that there's more like structural problems to it. Like it's hard to measure stuff like that. But I'm wondering on your views, like why, if we've been talking about it for I don't know how many years, why do we still not have a carbon tax?
We do have a carbon tax.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
we do.
But you may not recognize it because, for example, in the European Union, it's not a tax, but it's a tradable permit system. So the ETS, the European tradable, well, I forgot, EU ETS. It's a system where you, as a company, have to buy permits that allow you to emit a ton of CO2, and you have to buy these off an exchange, or you have to pay money for it. And currently, you have to pay, I think, about 80 euros, 80, for the right to emit a ton of carbon. But the thing is, these are companies have to buy these, and not all companies, specific sectors. They've started with sort of the biggest emitters, like energy plants, steel plants, like Tata Steel, for example. But in the end, we should really expand that to all activities in the economy. And airplanes have recently entered that system, but they still get some free allowances too, for so that they can get more adjustment time, sort of. Now there is a big political process going on too, and lobbying, of course. Many sectors received free allowances for a long time, but that's being reduced slowly. Maybe that should be quicker, but it is reduced, and also the ceiling of how many permits are available is slowly reduced over time, and that limits the total amount of emissions that can take place in the EU. Slowly drives up the price. So that system is already there and is working, but in the end it has to be expanded to all activity. everything we do.
Yeah.
But you don't see it because as a consumer, you don't have to buy a permit. It's companies that do so.
Fair enough. But isn't that more outsourcing of emissions than actually reducing them? Because that just leads to carbon intensive processes being based outside of the.
Yeah, that's indeed a good question. So that's one thing that I mentioned, right? Politicians' fear is exactly that. Now, the latest research that's out there, because it's young research, because it hasn't existed for so long, there's not so much data yet, but first papers have come out that do show that it does help. That the companies that are fall under the ETS have become less carbon intensive. And that the effect of carbon leakage is not that large as what you would expect. At the same time, the past data is also based on levels of the price that are not so high. It's climbed recently to a more serious price, so that might change. But that's also why the EU in its Green Deal proposes this carbon border adjustment mechanism. So that if you move your production abroad and then ship the goods that you produced elsewhere back to the EU, you have to pay a tax based on the carbon content of your rate of production. It's a good idea, but it's very hard to implement because what is the carbon content of your cell phone? How do you even measure it?
Yeah, so is that also for making it broader toward every all economic activity? That's a really big problem is the measuring.
Or something like carbon adjustment mechanism? Yes. Yeah, measurement.
So that is also the big reason that I don't have to pay carbon tax if I buy a steak.
Well, you can also you can let consumers pay, but you can also let let's say factory that produced your steak pay. It doesn't matter.
There's more time for, you can say something.
Well, I think we had a nice presentation, also a very nice discussion. I think also the discussion between Maarten and Steven also illustrates also what sort of complex society we're living. And the economy is not, it's very complex even. So there are very many externalities, very many poly crises, as Maarten has said it. So hopefully we've brought the discussion a bit more forward. I think we should have more of these discussions. So I'm also, with the last session, I'm also pleased to announce that there will be a special issue coming forward in 2024, summarizing all of these themes. And I'm also inviting those speakers here also to submit their paper to the special issue. So later on, we'll have it all written up as well. Hopefully. Okay. Well,
So, yeah.
thanks again.
Thank you all for coming.